The fleet drifted through the void, its hull scarred and battered by years of isolation, its crew weary but unbroken. What had once been a thriving armada, the pride of a mighty empire, was now a small, fragile group of ships, clinging to the thin thread of survival. The Viking king stood on the command deck of the lead vessel, the Raft, his cold gaze sweeping over the data screens. His eyes, once full of fire, had grown hollow from too many battles lost, too many worlds abandoned. Yet, in the deepest corners of his soul, the fire still smoldered. He was a leader, one who would never yield, no matter how the universe conspired against him. Above the control table, an ancient star chart blinked in and out of focus, outlining the lost fleet's path through the galaxy. They were stranded, far from home, separated by untold light years from their nearest allies. The technology they relied on had slowly begun to fail, their systems outdated and inefficient. The fleet had become a relic of a forgotten time, a symbol of a once great civilization on the edge of extinction. And now, in the darkness of space, the real enemy had found them. A ripple ran through the fleet, unnoticed at first. Then a sudden, sharp warning sounded from the sensors. A distant object, an immense disturbance, was drawing closer, something far beyond the capacity of any known ship, even one as formidable as the Raft. The beast, a gargantuan creature born of the stars themselves, had emerged from the abyss. Its form was massive and incomprehensible, a swirling mass of tendrils, scales, and eyes that seemed to blink across the fabric of space. It was as though the void had come alive, an ancient predator prowling the galaxy in search of prey. The warning alarms blared in unison, and a tense silence gripped the crew. The Viking king's eyes narrowed as he stared at the image of the creature on the screen. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the cold rush of anger. "This beast will not claim our lives today," he muttered, as though to himself, though his crew heard every word. But even as he spoke, the magnitude of their peril began to sink in. The fleet, already struggling with limited resources, was no match for this creature. It was a force of nature, a mindless, insatiable hunger that swept through the galaxy, devouring everything in its path. It had already destroyed entire star systems, reducing them to cosmic dust. Its name was whispered in fear across the galaxies, the Devourer. "What's our status?" the Viking king demanded, turning to his first officer, Magnus, a stoic man whose icy demeanor was only outmatched by his sharp strategic mind. "We are outgunned, outmatched," Magnus replied, his voice betraying none of the panic that gripped the rest of the crew. "We've sent out distress signals, but nothing is coming. We're alone." The Viking king's eyes flickered to the star chart once more. "Then we fight?" The tension in the command center thickened as the crew prepared for battle. The Viking king knew they had little chance of survival, but surrender was never an option. They were warriors. They were the sons and daughters of an ancient empire, raised on the principles of honor and glory. If they were to fall, they would do so on their feet, blades drawn, facing the beast with every ounce of defiance their spirits could muster. Magnus leaned forward, tapping a series of buttons on the control panel. "Captain, we have no choice. If we engage it head-on, we'll be obliterated before we can even get close. We need to outsmart it." The Viking king scowled, his pride rising up against the suggestion. He had never been one to use trickery or deceit. A warrior fought with strength, with valor, with honor. But his eyes lingered on the creature's image once more, the massive, all-consuming darkness of the Devourer, and a reluctant truth began to settle in. They were not facing a foe that respected honor. They were facing something that didn't care about them at all. The beast would not hesitate to tear their fleet apart, piece by piece, and swallow them whole. "Then outsmart it we will," he said finally. His voice was quiet but resolute, as though a weight had shifted inside him. "Gather the council. I need every mind we have." The command room buzzed with activity as the fleet's brightest minds were summoned. The council included some of the most brilliant engineers, tacticians, and scientists from across the fleet. As the Viking king entered the war room, his gaze fell on them, each one with a look of desperation in their eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. They knew that, despite the odds, the Viking king would give them a chance to fight. "We will not bow to this beast," the Viking king declared, his voice steady but fierce. "We are the sons and daughters of great warriors. We are humans, and we will find a way to defeat it." The engineers began to speak, their voices hushed, weighed down by the enormity of the situation. One suggested using advanced electromagnetic pulses to disrupt the creature's navigation, while another proposed creating an energy field to cloak the fleet's movements. But the more they discussed, the clearer it became. There was no straightforward solution. "We could try to confuse it," said a young tactician named Illyra, her face illuminated by the glow of a holographic display. "But we don't know what it wants. It may not even be able to be confused." "That's the heart of it," Magnus interjected. "We have no way of predicting its behavior. It's an instinctual predator. It devours without thought, without mercy. It's pure chaos." A heavy silence settled over the room. The Viking king stared at the map of the galaxy, as though seeking the answer within the stars themselves. The doors to the command room suddenly slid open, and a soft voice interrupted the stillness. It was the psychic navigator, Livia, her eyes distant, as though she were not fully present in the room. She had been silent up until now, lost in her own thoughts. But now she spoke. "There's something," she began, her voice trembling. "Something in the way it moves. It's not random. It's attracted to something. An energy signature." Her eyes locked onto the Viking king's. "Our fleet is drawn to us." The Viking king's heart raced, but not with fear. This was something new, something they could use. "Explain," he demanded, his voice sharp. "I don't know why," she said, her gaze unfocused. "But the beast, this devourer, it's attracted to the energy we emit. It senses us. It doesn't just hunt for food. It hunts for us." The Viking king stood still for a moment, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. This was no mindless beast. It was something older, something intelligent, perhaps even ancient, something that had learned to track its prey across the stars. And in their desperation, they had made themselves visible. "We'll use that," he said, his voice low but determined. "If it's drawn to us, we can make it chase us." The team looked at him, a spark of hope flickering in their eyes. There was a way forward, even if it was nothing more than a desperate gambit. But they were human, and that alone made them a threat. They would fight back. They would survive. The Viking king turned toward the viewport, watching as the darkness of space stretched out before him. The massive, insatiable force that was the devourer was coming for them. But now they had a plan. They had a chance. They would survive, or they would die as warriors. The battle had only just begun. The fleet hovered at the edge of the galaxy, where the void was vast, and the stars seemed far too distant to offer any salvation. The Viking king paced the war room, his heavy boots echoing on the metal floor as his mind raced. The ship's engines hummed in the background, a sound that once brought comfort, but now only reminded him of how precarious their situation had become. Every corner of the room was filled with tension, a quiet but palpable energy that could not be ignored. The crew gathered around the large table, their faces drawn with exhaustion, but their eyes fixed on the task ahead. Livia, the psychic navigator, sat at the table, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had been deep in meditation, attempting to sense the devourer's movements through the fabric of space, but her connection had been weak. "It's as though the creature is more than just an entity of destruction," she murmured, eyes distant. "It's a force. It moves with purpose." Magnus, the first officer, stood beside a wall of monitors, his expression unreadable as he studied the data. "It's a predator," he said with quiet certainty. "And like any predator, it's learned to track its prey. We've been sending out energy signatures without realizing the risk. The creature is using that to find us." The Viking king, who had been standing at the head of the table, clenched his fists. His mind spun with the weight of the decision that loomed. They had no time to waste, and the options before them seemed insufficient at best. His people had survived countless battles, but this was something entirely different. Then we turn the tables, he said, his voice hard with resolve. We make it hunt us, and we lead it straight into a trap. Livia's gaze flickered toward him, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. We can't just force it into a trap, she said, her voice hesitant. It's not that simple. The creature doesn't think like we do. It doesn't have a mind that operates on logic or reason. It's driven by instinct. We're not trying to reason with it, the Viking king replied, his voice sharp as he locked eyes with her. We're going to make it follow us. We'll lead it somewhere it doesn't want to be. Magnus turned, his hand on the control panel. It might not work. The creature could tear through our ships before we even get close enough. There's always a risk in battle, the Viking king said, his tone final. But I'm not giving up. Not now. They turned their attention back to the map of the galaxy displayed on the central screen. A network of lines and energy signatures appeared before them, each line representing a route they could take, a place they could hide, or perhaps somewhere they could confront the beast. It was a strategy born of desperation, but it was the only card they had left to play. The engineers had already begun work on a new energy emitter, a device designed to manipulate the energy field around their ships. It was experimental at best, untested in the real world, but the crew had no choice but to try. Elira, the young tactician, was standing beside them, her face lit with a glow of determination. If we emit a concentrated pulse, she said, it could throw the creature off for a while. At least long enough to make a run for it. It's a gamble, Magnus said, shaking his head. We don't know if this will work, and we don't know how much time we have before it catches up with us. We don't have the luxury of time, the Viking king said, his voice low and firm. He could feel his muscles tense as the weight of his responsibility pressed down on him. This wasn't just about winning. It was about survival. The survival of his people, the survival of his fleet. The plan was simple in theory. They would use their own energy signatures to lure the creature, guiding it away from the main fleet and toward a small, uninhabited moon where they had set up a trap. The creature, driven by its insatiable hunger, would follow them, an intelligent force, albeit one guided by pure instinct, and the humans would use that to their advantage. But as simple as it sounded, there were many things that could go wrong. The creature was unpredictable, and their knowledge of it was limited. They could be walking into a situation that would destroy them all. Let's get to work, the Viking king said, his voice brokering no argument. The crew worked quickly, coordinating with a sense of urgency that bordered on frenzy. Engineers scrambled to activate the pulse emitters while the rest of the fleet prepared for the upcoming maneuver. Each crew member knew their role, but the weight of their task was heavy. Their entire strategy depended on luring the Devourer far enough to set the trap and hope that it would be enough. There were no guarantees. As the fleet began its descent toward the coordinates they had chosen, a sharp sense of unease settled in the Viking king's chest. He stood at the helm of the raft, staring out at the stars, each one a reminder of how far they had come and how close they were to the edge of oblivion. His thoughts returned to Livia's earlier words. The creature was more than a beast. It was a force, and in that moment, he realized that it was not just a force of nature they were fighting, it was the universe itself, indifferent to their struggles, their lives. The Viking king had always known that the cosmos was vast, but now, faced with the creature, he saw the full scope of its cold, unforgiving power. I've always believed that strength wins battles, the Viking king said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. But sometimes it's not strength that wins. It's wit. It's will. And that is what will save us. Magnus, who had been standing at his side, didn't respond immediately. His gaze was focused on the approaching moon. Or it's what will get us all killed. The Viking king didn't flinch at the words. He had led many into battle, and he had watched many fall. His heart had hardened over the years, and though he had learned to fight with his head as much as his body, the pride of a warrior still burned inside him. He was willing to risk everything. Brace yourselves, he commanded. The ship's engines roared to life, and the fleet moved into formation, with the pulse emitters charging up in tandem. The trap was set, and now they only had to wait for the beast to take the bait. Minutes passed in tense silence as they drew closer to the designated location. Then, suddenly, the alarms blared again. The Devourer had found them. The monstrous shape of the beast appeared on the edge of their sensors, a dark blotch against the endless void of space. It moved with terrifying speed, its massive form hurtling toward them with the force of a cosmic storm. The crew stiffened, ready for whatever came next. The Viking king felt his pulse quicken, but he stood firm. His mind was clear. He had made his choice. Now, he said, the pulse emitters discharged, sending out a wave of energy that disrupted the creature's path, altering its trajectory. For a moment, it hesitated, its many eyes blinking as though confused. But then, just as they had hoped, it followed. The beast, driven by its primal instincts, locked onto the new energy signature and surged forward, its terrible maw opening as it closed in on the bait. The trap was working, but as the fleet raced toward the moon, the Viking king knew this was only the beginning. The beast was a force of nature, and forces like that could never truly be tamed. They could only be outwitted. The true test was yet to come. Would the humans' gamble pay off? Would the creature fall into their trap? Or would their fleet be consumed in the aftermath of their boldness? The Viking king could only wait, his mind focused on one thought. They had a chance, and as long as there was a chance, there was hope. The beast loomed just beyond the horizon of the moon, its colossal form a dark blotch against the bright stars. It surged forward, undeterred by the pulse of energy that had briefly thrown it off course. The pulse emitters on the fleet's ships continued to hum with power, but the Viking king knew that the creature was adapting. It was a predator, and predators learned. The seconds felt like hours as the raft and its fleet hurtled toward the moon, each ship cloaked in the artificial electromagnetic field designed to obscure their movements. Magnus stood beside the Viking king at the command center, his expression taut, his eyes scanning the rapidly closing distance between them and the Devourer. The energy signature they had emitted earlier had drawn the beast in, but it was no longer enough to keep it disoriented. The creature's eyes, millions of them, scattered across its massive form, seemed to lock onto the fleet, calculating their every move. It had begun to accelerate, a terrifying, instinctual response to the perceived threat. And there was no denying it now. The trap, though still intact, was no longer foolproof. The Devourer was closing in, faster than anyone had anticipated. "We've got one shot at this," Magnus said, his voice tight with urgency. "If we don't do it right now, it's over." The Viking king nodded, his face grim, but his mind clear. "We'll give it everything we've got. Hold steady, all ships." His words echoed across the fleet's communication channels, though his heart was pounding. His eyes flickered toward the view screen once more, watching as the massive beast approached, its form growing larger and larger with every passing moment. It was now or never. The fleet's ships, small in comparison to the Devourer's sheer mass, began to circle the moon in a precise formation. The Viking king had ordered the remaining pulse emitters to target the creature's weak points, the large, blind spots near its underbelly, the only vulnerable areas in its nearly indestructible armor. The first round of pulses hit, but the Devourer's skin seemed to resist, its monstrous form barely flinching. A collective breath was held across the fleet as the beast snarled, its many eyes shifting in frantic anticipation. Then Livia, the psychic navigator, her brow furrowed with concentration, spoke from her station. It's reacting to something else. It's not just trying to destroy us. It's trying to understand us. It's learning from us." The Viking king's mind raced. The creature wasn't just hunting. They had underestimated it. It wasn't mindless. It was intelligent. It had been tracking their every move. The creature had sensed the pulse, understood it, and now it was using that knowledge to anticipate their strategy. "We need to accelerate the plan," Magnus said, his voice strained. "Now!" The Viking king's eyes flicked to the holographic map, then back to the Devourer, now impossibly close. The trap was a failure, at least the way they had envisioned it. There was no time left for retreat. The creature was too clever, too close, and there were no more tricks to play. It was not just a battle of strength anymore. It had become a battle of wills. "Activate the final phase," the Viking king ordered, his voice unwavering despite the weight of their impending doom. The fleet's remaining ships split into two groups, one holding the line and continuing to emit pulses to distract the Devourer, while the other veered sharply toward the moon's surface. They would make a final stand on the very planet the beast had been drawn to. It was a move born of desperation, but it was the only option left. The Viking king watched as the raft veered off into the chaos. He could see the glow of the pulse emitter flickering, weak now, as it strained to produce enough energy to keep the creature at bay. The beast, sensing its prey getting closer, lunged forward with terrifying speed. Its jagged, incomprehensible form twisted in the void as it closed in on the ships. "Brace!" shouted Magnus, his hands tightening on the control panel. The ship shuddered as the shockwaves from the Devourer's approach rattled every surface. The cold metal groaned in protest, but the Viking king remained resolute. The plan had always been a long shot, but the human spirit, the will to survive, the refusal to surrender, had always been their greatest strength. They could not defeat the Devourer with brute force, but they had something the creature lacked: the will to keep fighting when every chance of victory seemed lost. The pulse emitters strained again, now pushing out a final, overwhelming burst of energy that swept across the dark expanse of space. It wasn't enough to destroy the beast, but it caused the creature to pause, its many eyes blinking in confusion. This was humanity's final play, not just technology, but their stubborn, relentless drive to endure. The Viking king stood at the command center, his heart pounding as the ship raced toward the surface of the moon. A deadly silence hung in the air as he gave one last command. "All ships, prepare to fire everything." From the heart of the fleet, a barrage of concentrated energy beams shot toward the Devourer, each beam like a lance striking the heart of the beast. It was a desperate move, one that required every ounce of their remaining strength. The blast was enough to send a shockwave rippling through the Devourer's form, causing the creature to writhe in pain. It wasn't dead, not yet, but for the first time, it faltered. Magnus gripped the armrest of his chair, watching as the Devourer roared in agony, its massive form convulsing. The first officer's voice was barely a whisper. We might have done it." But the Viking king wasn't celebrating yet. He wasn't the kind of leader to allow himself such luxuries. "Stay focused. It's not over. It's never over." As the creature writhed in the distance, the fleet's ships moved closer to the moon's surface, ready to take cover and regroup. The Devourer, now injured, began to retreat, its movements slow but deliberate. It wasn't defeated yet, but the human spirit had won this round. The creature, though powerful, could not match the fierce will that drove the fleet to continue fighting, to keep pressing forward against impossible odds. In the aftermath, the Viking king stood alone on the command deck, staring out at the stars. He could feel the weight of their victory, but it wasn't one of triumph. It was one of survival. They had made it, but the battle was far from over. The Devourer was not the only threat in the galaxy, and there were more forces at play, forces that would test them again and again. But that, he knew, was the way of the universe. It was harsh. It was indifferent. But as long as humanity had the strength to fight, there would always be hope. And in that hope, there was always the possibility of victory. For the Viking king, and for all those who stood with him, the fight would never end. And as long as they drew breath, the human spirit would always prevail.